Good morning, everyone. We're so glad that you decided to join us this morning at 9 a.m. It says part one and part two, but it's really just going to be a continuous session. So we hope that you'll be able to join us for both parts. I'm Heather Gooch, and I am a research assistant professor at the University of South Carolina and work on several projects related to supporting young children with disabilities in early childhood settings. And we have a pretty big panel today, which I'm very excited about. Dr. Kate Ascetta will be joining us. And each one is going to introduce themselves during their part of the panel. Dr. Kate Chappell is here. Victoria Davis was not able to join us today, but we're going to talk about some work that she's doing. Kerri Cannengeiser is with us, and Mary Reeves, as well as Kerri Wikel. So we've got two Kates, two Kerrys, a Mary and a Heather. So that should get us started. Feel free. I think Samantha talked to you guys about the chat and the Q&A, but we welcome questions, and we'll have some time at the end of the second session to talk more with you and to answer some questions. So I just wanted to start out by giving a little description of how we got to this place with so many panelists available to talk about supporting children with disabilities in general education placements and early childhood settings. Early intervention, early childhood special education is a relatively new thing. I say new, it was 86. I feel like anything within my lifetime is new, so you'll have to forgive me for that. But in 1986, we got some federal legislation that said that special education children with disabilities don't need to wait until they start first grade to receive services and supports, especially if there's a disability that can be identified in those early years. So we started with early intervention, early childhood special education are provided in two parts of the legislation. One is Part C, and in South Carolina, that's BabyNet. And we'll talk a little bit about that when Kerri Wikel talks to us about the Team for Early Childhood Solutions. And then there's Part B, which supports children 3 through 21. BabyNet is birth to 3. Part B is 3 through 21, but we have a very specific little subsection of Part B that's focused on preschool children. And so we'll talk about some initiatives today that are working in that space as well. But those programs and the federal legislation, those are meant to be sort of individual supports for children and their families. And so what we've needed to do and what we've done over a number of years is build in some supports for the teachers and caregivers that are in community-based childcare settings, Head Starts, to support children with disabilities well in those settings. So here we are, many years ago. I don't know when it started. I wasn't around for this part, but there was a program that was funded through Child Care Development Funds called the ABC Special Needs Program, not to be confused with the voucher, that provided some training and consultation to support children with disabilities in child care. About 10 years ago, the Inclusion Collaborative started, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And I think Beginnings was just getting started, and we were, ramping up our professional development in both Part C and Part B 619. But and then, we are still considering there are some more specialized supports, and so the work that Beginnings does with children who are deaf or hard of hearing and their families, and some new initiatives that we're going to talk about today are going to kind of help us round out this kind of landscape of services. I also didn't want to let this opportunity pass to note that this infrastructure for supporting children with disabilities in inclusive settings is not a single funding source, nor is the early childhood system. So it kind of mirrors that. The programs that we're going to learn about today are funded by IDA Part C funds, which is our BabyNet program at Department of Health and Human Services. We're going to learn about supports that are funded through IDEA Part B 619 funds, those preschool funds. We're going to learn about initiatives funded through the Child Care Development Fund, quality dollars. And we're going to also learn about some newer initiatives that have been funded through preschool development grant funding. And I mentioned it yesterday in our studio session, but we are really fortunate to be in a state who wanted to use some of those PDG funds to invest in supports for children with disabilities and their families, birth to 5. And so we're excited to share those things with you. And please let us know, as questions come up, and we'll try to we'll try to pause if we can, but we also will have a longer question and answer period during part 2. All right, Kerri.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Good. All right. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. I am really excited to be here. I was humbled when Heather asked me to be a part of this panel of extremely successful contributors to our field. So I feel honored to be able to speak on our program at TECS and to just give you some information about it, what we do and where we're going. That's actually the most exciting part. So just a brief introduction of myself and kind of how I fit in this puzzle and on this panel. I've been involved in, my name is Kerri Wikel. Obviously, there I am. I have been involved in just working with children for probably 20 plus years now, but I have been dedicated to the early intervention field specifically for close to 10. I started as an early interventionist at a large private agency here in the Midlands. That's where I am, is in Columbia. As an early interventionist, like I said, and eventually throughout the almost 10 years, maybe 9, moved my way up to state director of early intervention and oversaw 5 offices here around our state. The most important part of that, though, was really while I was at that private agency, I just discovered this love for training and more so not training, but educating and just being a part of how we can all as a community just be better Part C providers. And so I started doing a lot of researching when I was there at this private agency on just evidence-based practices, how we can just include our families even more. Not that we weren't doing it, but I just have the firm belief that we can always be better. And so that's kind of where my trajectory went. I was doing a lot of researching while in this position and training and educating and just trying to share my overwhelming passion for family involvement and inclusion. So from that, I was able and lucky enough to be state certified in routines-based interview, which I'm going to talk a lot more in detail about in just a little bit. Went on to be fortunate enough to be nationally certified in the coaching model, is what they call it, at the Home Visiting Institute. It's the Siskin Institute in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So that was really exciting. I spent a week there and then was able to, again, come back and share and educate and train the staff that I was working with at the time. So then in November of last year, amidst all of our fun COVID pandemic, I took the jump and became the project director here at TECS, which is Team for Early Childhood Solution, and immediately just began collaborating with several state agencies, just connecting with people, working very closely with our Part C office, and Heather mentioned that, and I'll talk more about them, to just how are we going to ensure that quality of services is high level, and how do we define high level, and how do we include everybody on the team, and just working to collaborate to find ways to better our services. Because like I said, I just feel strongly that we can always do better and be better for our families, and that's ultimately our goal. So that's just a little bit about me and kind of how I fit. We can go to the next slide, Heather. Thank you. So I'm just going to give you the next 2 slides, just a little bit of history of TECS. And I'm just going to refer to it as TECS because Team for Early Childhood Solutions, first of all, I'm just going to get it jumbled. And second of all, it will just take me too long to finish my presentation. So we serve as the training and technical assistance unit for the BabyNet early intervention system since July of 1992. So, you know, when Heather talks about just a lifetime ago, 1992 was a lifetime ago. So TECS has been around for a long time. And I'll get more into BabyNet in just a little bit. Originally, which this was a new information to me as I was embarking on this presentation, it was named the Early Intervention Technical Assistance Center, so EITAC. Heather might remember that. Some people might remember that. So TECS has strived to provide the highest quality professional development for nearly 30 years, right? So we've been around for, this program has been around for a long time. It's gone through a lot of changing technologies, methods of training delivery, our ever-changing federal and state requirements, constant research, because we know evidence-based practice in this field changes all the time, and for the good, right? We want to, that's our goal of Texas, to kind of stay up on top of all of that and be able to then give that information to our Part C providers. So then in 2004, TECS actually transitioned to where it was all face-to-face, which now you kind of find that unfathomable. Like A, because of the pandemic, but B, there's just so many amazing providers around the state that we couldn't possibly, although we would love to be face-to-face with everybody, we couldn't possibly do that. So in 2004, TECS had to kind of come up with other ways to have this training be successful. And that was through technical assistance. And it started with our online learning management system, which used to be Textbook 2.0. Sounds like so retro, but now it's known as Skills, and that is our South Carolina early intervention learning system. And I'm going to speak on that again some more. This is just kind of a brief overview. So Skills now serves as the foundation of our BabyNet comprehensive system of personnel development and our South Carolina early intervention credential for all early intervention providers. That would be all of our early interventionists, our therapy providers, anybody that has a Part C contract is going to be in our system here at TECS, our skills system, and that's where they get credentialed in order to be able to provide services to the families. TECS also manages a little bit of our BabyNet help desk through some systems called Bridges. We as well, and I'll talk more about this, we provide and create monthly transition reports for our schools, for our Part B school districts, and our family outcomes data collection reporting is housed here at TECS. We can go to the next one. Thank you. All right, so there's going to be a lot of acronyms. I feel like that's just the world in which we live in early childhood. There's a lot of acronyms. So I'm going to throw a couple at you just again for just some history of TECS. TECS is actually contracted by South Carolina BabyNet system through federal grant monies from the Office of Special Education. So that's OSEP. That's our first acronym. Or actually, it's like our third now, but still. As Heather mentioned, BabyNet is South Carolina's early intervention system. It's Part C under the IDEA Act. We serve, or they serve, children birth to 3 who have disabilities and or special needs and their families. The BabyNet system has seen several agency changes over time, and now they're currently housed at Department of Health and Human Services. I get to work very closely with our Part C office. They are an amazing group of people that are just out there trying to serve our families and give them the best services that they can. So that's been a fun connection to make. Anybody can make a referral to BabyNet. I'm sure a lot of you on here know a good amount about BabyNet. There are free services offered to families if you qualify, if your family qualifies, things like early intervention, speech therapy, physical therapy. I can go on and on. But, just an amazing program that's free of charge for families that qualify. So the TECS project is actually housed at Center for Disability Resources, which CDR. CDR is a University for Excellence, which is, here's another one, you said, within the University of South Carolina School of Medicine. So we're actually part of MUSC School of Medicine. And then our CDR is a member of the Association of University Centers on Disabilities. That's a USED. Basically, all that is a membership organization that supports and promotes a national network of university-based interdisciplinary programs. What is all that? basically, just through the national network, you said uses a variety of ways to support all people living with developmental and or other disabilities, right? So it's just a lot of words for just support for people with disabilities, housed in universities. Okay, we can go on to the next one. Thank you. Okay, so our current responsibilities here at TECS, right? So let's just talk about a little bit about what we do here at TECS, Team for Early Childhood Solutions, and how we kind of fit into our early intervention and early childhood setting. So we provide information and resources that promote the congruence of a lot of things, right? So we make sure that there's congruence between our federal law, our state policy, our evidence-based practices, and then our service delivery, right? So we support these efforts to Part C providers through a variety of different methods. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them. So I mentioned skills briefly earlier, and that's our South Carolina Early Intervention Learning System. So that is a learning management system that is housed at TECS. And once you become a Part C credentialed contractor, if you will, then you become part of skills. And there's several other people that have access to skills that, want to be part of our BabyNet system. But that's mainly who accesses it. And it houses a lot of our trainings. And my goal in the future is for it to house even more trainings. It's guided. We have a bunch of different ways that we do trainings. You can say you do a Zoom training, we can put it on there, and our Part C providers can access it. Our providers are moving and grooving day in and day out. They're in and out of homes. So it's just a really great platform for them to be able to access information and training at their leisure when they're able to. They are serving our families, and that's the most important part. And, of course, we want their training to be a big piece as well. But skills allows them to do it when they are able to. So it's been wildly successful. Again, we house the credentialing of new BabyNet providers there. We have been so fortunate to make wonderful connections with our folks at SCIMA, South Carolina Infant Mental Health Training, and they have put together a 3-series training that we have just launched on skills. The last training was launched in October, and that has been very successful. People have had just wonderful feedback. So again, we're including everybody. We're trying to get all of our agencies on board to be able to provide this training and professional development for our providers. We house our policy and procedures training there. Our brand new general supervision plan is housed there. That's to let Part C providers understand our supervision plan within our state. We also have our family outcomes training there. And as we speak on inclusion, we're talking inclusion in childcare centers as well as within families and just as an IFSP team. And our family outcome survey is a survey that allows families to provide their feedback and experience that they've had within the BabyNet system. It's actually a project that was just overhauled last year. We have completely changed our family outcome survey. We've modeled off of several other successful states. Our Part C office did an amazing job doing all the research in that. And so, it's more to promote some inclusion of the family and how they felt about their services. It's provided to the family when they have received 6 months of early intervention services and then at the exit of the program. So they're really able to tell us, how do you feel in the first 6 months? And then how do you feel when you leave? And how do you feel as a parent being able, or as a caregiver, being able to navigate the system moving forward? So not only did we change our survey, but we've changed how we deliver it. We've changed, how the data, how it's collected and what we do with that data. So it's become a really great tool to be able to provide feedback to not only our providers, but for us at TECS to be able to see maybe where there's some holes and where we can include some new trainings, what families really feel about the progress or potential growth that we might need in our program. So that's been a really big project and an exciting one. So we also hold virtual trainings at TECS. We just completed a huge virtual training and routines-based interview, which I'll speak on. We have our brand new TECS website. I'll talk about that. It is beautifully remodeled. We hope to be in person one day again and doing some face-to-face trainings on evidence-based practice. You know, I have, in my position, I'm fully open to going to agencies and helping in any which way that I can as we continue to provide new trainings to our Part C providers. But as far as big groups, we're not quite there yet, but I feel certain that we will be soon. And like I said, we maintain and distribute that family outcome survey. I already spoke on that. And we distribute those monthly transition reports to the South Carolina Department of Education and local education agencies, again, including everybody. And this is, our transition reports are when our children in our Part C BabyNet system, when they turn 3, they will be leaving, like Heather mentioned, that we serve birth to 3. And then at 3, they could potentially go into our Part B preschool special services program, which I'm sure somebody's going to speak on. Okay, we can go to the next one. Heather, did you leave us?
I'm here. I just lost my little controls to advance the slide. Okay, well, I'll figure this out. It's going to be okay.
Not a problem. Technology works until it doesn't. There you go.
There we go.
Thank you. Okay, so for the exciting part, not that all that was not exciting, but what's coming to TECS to then give to everybody else, to all of our Part C providers, which then our families benefit from, is, and I'm going to go into this a little bit more detail, but our biggest project is our complete reconstruction of our comprehensive system of personal development. It has not been utilized in a very long time. We had a lot of other things to do, and I'll talk about what we had to do, but we are going to start that project in January of 2022. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. We have routines-based interview. Our next slide, I'm going to go into a lot of detail about that. We are looking then to move forward after all of that to do our coaching model for our home visitors. I use coaching model loosely. It's more so we are trying to go from child-centered to family-centered services within the home. Most of our Part C providers are doing that already, but again, how can we get better? How can we better serve our families? How can we include everybody? Our child care providers, our teachers, our pediatricians' offices. I mean, you name it, whoever's on the IFSP plan, we want them to be a part of early intervention services. And so again, our South Carolina inclusion training, already in the works, been working with Heather and the South Carolina Inclusion Collaborative to start that process and start that training. And then other evidence-based practices. So I'm thinking about things like natural environments. Why is that so important to our providers? And why is that so important for our families? And how does that tie in with inclusion? Topics like autism, trauma, rural communities, how do our early intervention providers navigate through that? So we're just looking to really expand a lot of our trainings because that's what our providers need and that's what our families need. And I think, as a whole, it'll just be better for everybody. Okay, we can go on. If you're still there, go. So I mentioned routines-based interview, RBI, a lot in the last couple of slides. So I just want to kind of break it down for you because this is a huge project that TECS and Part C office have taken on and trained on. So our routines-based interview was an interview that was created by Dr. Robin McWilliams. Some of you may or may not be familiar. I'm very familiar. I've studied just a lot of his work. He is currently at the University of Alabama, and he houses a huge routines-based early intervention program there. If you're ever interested, you can just Google him. You can find him all kinds of information. He used to be the director at Siskin Institute, which is where our consultant, our RBI, South Carolina RBI consultant comes from. And I went to that institute to complete the coaching model home visiting training. So it's basically a family assessment designed to gather a ton of detailed information about the family, right? And I say that because in the past, we've used a lot of curriculum-based assessments, which is fine, and they serve a wonderful purpose, and we get great information about development. But we learned as, Part C providers that it was a lot of what the child couldn't do, whereas the routines-based interview focuses on what the child can do and from the family's perspective, so through the family's eyes, which promotes a lot of inclusion, right? We as Part C providers potentially would walk into a home and checklist, and then sort of be done. And we would, come up with our plan and all those things. And that wasn't wrong, but this routines-based interview is just better. It's a lot more personal. Like I said, it involves the entire family. It looks at the family as a unit. And as cliche as it sounds, we say, early intervention only takes place an hour a week, but that's really the truth. And we know that, right, from all of our evidence and research. But how do we get the family involved in a way in which they can sustain it? Because we're busy as families. And this routines-based interview really kicks that off. It promotes, it results in a lot of family-centered participation-based outcomes. Our goals have really shifted with routines-based interview on the IFSP. And I say that, the Individualized Family Service Plan. They've really made a shift. It's much more inclusive of what the family wants and needs. Whereas before, our goals were derivative from the Carolina curriculum or whatever curriculum you use, the HELP or the AEPS, which again, not wrong, developmentally appropriate, right? But not as inclusive with the family as we wanted. And so this RBI it promotes that family-centered participation-based outcome. It also promotes and establishes positive family and early interventionist relationships very early on. So it's like I said, it is personal, which can sometimes feel a little uncomfortable at first when we're not right. It's new, right? Everything that's new feels uncomfortable at first, but it really connects the early interventionist with the family quickly, having the family be much more involved because they've made that connection. It does also focus on development, right? The questions that we ask through routines-based interview focus on engagement and social relationships and independence, but it talks about it within the family as a unit and not individually, like over here on the side, there's this child that's doing or not doing these things. So most importantly, the RBI has been adopted as the South Carolina Part C's State Systematic Improvement Plan, the SSIP, as our new main family assessment indicator, which is amazing. So we have adopted this as protocol for our Part C providers in South Carolina. Proud to say that half of our state has been trained and is currently rolling out the RBI as their family assessment tool. We did not know that we would see that day. Our RBI consultant that I had mentioned earlier from Tennessee, she comes here to South Carolina and helps. She came and started this training back in May of 2019. And then shortly after that, the world shut down, as we know. And so, when I came on to TECS, I met with our Part C provider office and, just kind of scrambled to say, we just can't stop time. We've got to figure out a way to keep this going. And so we just completely revamped and restructured, just like all of us have in this pandemic, and came up with a way to do it virtually. So now half of our state has been trained and our other half is scheduled to be trained by March of 2023. And that's just going to be amazing. It's a new day in South Carolina now that we have this different family assessment plan. And again, it identifies that inclusion is important when it comes to the success of the child in their environment. So caregivers, teachers, formal supports, pediatricians, therapists, they all play such a vital role in the success of our children. And we know that. So this is the first step into that inclusion process. Okay, you go next. So let's talk about our CSPD. The top is just the feds. I'm not going to read that. It's just our federal regulations. It tells us what we have to do, right? Because we talked earlier how TECS has to manage all the congruence between all different things. So federal law, state policy, all of the things. So top is our federal regulations. Basically, it's just saying that we are responsible here at TECS to train personnel to implement innovative strategies and activities for the recruitment and retention of providers, right? This is really important when we're talking about providers in rural areas. We're responsible for promoting the preparation of providers, right? Making sure that they're fully and adequately qualified to provide early intervention services under Part C. So that's our credentialing system, and we're going to be revamping that. I'll talk about that. Training our personnel to coordinate transition services. And that's an important piece. We want to train and educate and empower our families as they navigate to the next part of our journey to Part C, because even though we would love to be with our families forever as early interventionists, I remember that I would love to have been with my families forever. That's just not possible. So we want to send them into the next phase fully prepared. What questions do you need to ask? How do you advocate for your child? And that's a big piece of our personnel development project. You know, we want to make sure that our providers are able to not just provide services because they always and already do it so well, but how can we educate our families to do that for themselves? That's a big piece. And so we do all that. So in order to achieve all those things and all those pieces of our CSPD, we're talking, you know, training. I mentioned training personnel to work in rural and inner city areas, training personnel in emotional and social development of young children. We're starting that. We're taking those first steps. We're including that in our training. It's so important. So training our personnel to support families in fully participating in the development and implementation of our IFSP, RBI, right? Our families are 100% included in that development of the IFSP, their individualized family service plan. And now we want to really train our staff and our Part C providers to support the families in fully participating in the development or the implementation of. And so, you know, that's like that coaching model we talked about, which we're getting there. We're getting there. So kind of going back a little bit, right? I talked about how, you know, our CSPD, our comprehensive system of personnel development, is our big project. But in order to get here, to get to where we are right now, a lot of things had to take place first. A little bit of rebuilding, just revamping. So in 2020, November of 2020, with new leadership, that would be myself, you know, I went, talked to the Part C office and said, all right, let's get a list together. What has to be done? And so one of the things was updating and re-recording BabyNet basics for credentialing. I think it was 2008. I could be wrong on that. Stephanie Donald will know better, but that's, I think, when the first BabyNet basics was recorded, or the latest version. So we spent a lot of time updating, re-recording all of that, because it had to be done. We had to learn and manage and launch skills, right? Our new learning management system. Some people over in Greece own it. So we spent hours with them learning the system and then launching it and people learning it. So that was a big project. Routines-based interview implementation. I've already spoke a lot on that. We re-platformed and updated our TECS website. In all honesty, our TECS website just launched in 2021, about October of 2021. We just released our new website and I have high hopes for it. I want to direct as much traffic as I can there. I want resources there at the fingertips for our Part C providers, blogs, videos. You know, the possibilities are endless now for this new platform. And so that was a lot and it had to be done. And now it's done. So really excited about that. And then we had to revise and train and implement that family outcomes measurement process that I talked on earlier, which just launched in July of 2021. So now that that's all done, you can go to the next slide. we are going to be beginning in January of 2022. We are going to be pulling a team together to begin our CSPD project. So this is really exciting. And this is going to include a lot of different things. So inclusion within childcare centers. We're going to do natural environments. We're talking the coaching and pyramid model, child-centered intervention versus family-centered intervention, universal foundational Part C curriculum. So it's currently the BabyNet Basics. We're redoing it. We're going to pull a team together. Then we're going to collaborate with partnering agencies. It's just going to be an exciting time for us and our Part C providers making that shift. So we're going to dive into the current provider qualifications. We're going to reinstitute qualifications for continued education, continued certification, as well as provide much needed trainings on topics like autism, and just to name one. We want to teach our providers about inclusion within childcare centers. Big, huge project that we have. We know that early intervention is a circle, not a triangle, right? We're not sitting on the floor anymore in that triangle of child, EI, and caregiver. It includes everyone that supports the child day to day. So we're really starting to shift from, and with the help of RBI, to family-centered home visiting versus child-centered home visiting. We want to teach our our providers to empower their families. And in order to teach this, the entire team has to be involved and included on the IFSP. So we know that the better our Part C providers are and how more educated they are and how knowledgeable they are and excited and passionate they are about inclusion, the better our families are served. And that's all I have for you today. I hope I didn't take up too much time, but thank you. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at in any of those forms, or I'll be around for the whole presentation and I'll be around at the end. Thank you, Heather.
Hello, I'm guessing this is my cue since this looks like one of my slides. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Kerri. Such great information and content. So just very briefly, my name is Dr. Kate Ascetta. I'm an assistant professor here at the University of South Carolina. And if you know people, this is a shameless plug unrelated to the two things I'm about to talk about next. If you know folks who are interested in getting the add-on certification in early childhood special education, email me. I'm the gal. We currently, I believe, have one of the only programs in the state that have all 6 courses that are required. So please let us know if you know people who are looking to get that add-on. We would love to support your folks in getting that add-on in early childhood special education. Okay, that's enough of that business. So what am I really here to talk about? Well, two basic, or I guess not too basic, but 2 initiatives that we're going to be focusing on here through the PDG grant. The first is the Early Childhood Higher Education Inclusion Consortium. That's a lot of words to basically say we've put together a list of, or sort of compiled the list of all the faculty in 2- and 4-year institutions who are focused on work related to early childhood education and early childhood special education. So this is, right now we have a list of 94 faculty across 18 institutions. And you might be saying to yourself, why would you want to have this list? Well, I'm a big proponent of academic freedom, and I think it's really important that individuals who teach courses have the opportunity and the ability to choose what and how they teach. But what we want to make sure is that regardless of what you're teaching, we're making sure that we're including language and content related to including young children with disabilities, literally from the start. So this is an opportunity for faculty to get together and collaborate, share resources, and learn from one another and from our community partners. We actually have Mary Reeves was going to be presenting, but from SC, from Beginnings SC, but Kara instead will be presenting with us in early January to be sharing about the importance of hearing screenings and really supporting young children with hearing loss or hearing impairment. So we'll be focused really heavily on that in January with faculty. We had our first meeting in early October, a really nice turnout. And this sort of brown bag series where faculty get together is to talk a little bit about what are some barriers to getting pre-service teachers access to young children with disabilities for practicum settings, learning? And so that's some of the things that we're going to be brainstorming. A little insider tip, one of the major things that we were focusing on and sort of came up again and again is the lack of access to high quality classrooms for practicum settings. So if you know folks who have some really lovely high quality early child care positions that, or not positions, but settings where practicum students could do their placements, we're always looking for those kinds of placements, opportunities to learn and grow with our community members. So that's something that has sort of come up again and again for us. Yeah, I think I'm going to leave it at that. Because I think most of you, while you were like, that's probably a little interesting, let's get to the piece that you're probably most interested about, which is, pardon me, which is See It. So another piece of the PDG grant, this sort of Mix-EC grant that many of us are working on together, the big piece that I've been thinking a lot about is See It, or Special Education Itinerant Services. I actually was an itinerant teacher myself for a couple of years back when I taught in New York, small children. Now I teach big children, aka college students, which I would say are not that dissimilar from the 3 and 4 year olds that I taught. Just kidding, 20-year-olds. So one of the things that I wanted to sort of give a little bit of a brief overview is what are or what is itinerant services, and then what are we doing to support young children with disabilities and making sure that they're further included in their community settings. So just a little brief overview of what itinerant instruction is. So it provides guidance and support to the child's family. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that sort of triad looks like in the next slide. Not yet, Heather. It offers indirect consultation services to the students' general education professionals. So what does that actually mean? It means that the special education itinerant teacher is going to be providing consultation and coaching to the classroom teachers. So wherever the child may be, whether it's in a First Steps or perhaps a Head Start setting, or maybe in a 4K or a community-based, faith-based childcare, whatever it happens to be. You can be able to, we want to make sure that we're providing special education services in community-based settings. So this is a little bit of a shift because we're not really providing that direct instruction like we would in a self-contained class, but rather we're going to be utilizing their natural environment when the folks are having the most access and opportunity to them, and to be able to learn and grow alongside their typically developing peers. So we really want to support that. And engages collaboratively with related service providers. So we also want to be collaborating as the itinerant instructor, both with any related services the child may get, speech, OT, PT, whatever kinds of support you might need. It encourages the development of the child's self-regulation skills, as well as social emotional skills within the context of their community setting. And one of the major issues that comes up, not just in South Carolina, but all across the nation, is LRE, least restrictive environment. Whoopsies. What ends up happening? We end up seeing way too many kids getting referred for 3DD and 4DD classrooms. And partially that's because we don't get training. I'm going to pretend like I'm going to ask you a question. I'll pretend like you're all raising your hands. So we'll just pretend like we're in the same space together. If you have a degree in early childhood special education or special education, did you receive any training related in your pre-service program or your master's program related to consultation and coaching in a community setting? It's silent, so probably not, right? I certainly didn't in my master's program. And most of our early childhood special educators are not, in fact, receiving that training. So there's a real gap. We end up having too many kids in 3DD, 4DD settings, which is in fact not their least restrictive environment. They need to be served in the community, but how do we do that? How do we sort of bridge that gap? And itinerant services, I would argue, and so would the literature, that this is a great way to be able to support children and families in naturalistic environments. Heather? Thank you. So, community-based placement and partnerships. If you know me personally or professionally, I'm a huge fan of working closely and genuinely collaboratively with my community partners. And I think that itinerant services, when done really well, is a triad. So you'll see the two adult figures up at the top. Let's pretend one of them is an itinerant teacher, and then the other human is the child care provider or the classroom teacher. Rather than working directly with the child and providing direct services, we're going to consult and coach as the itinerant with the classroom staff that are there regularly, day in and day out. Very similar to what Kerri was saying earlier, we know that their primary caregivers, whether that be the home or if they're in a community-based setting, particularly if they're in childcare from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., like so many young children are, this is a great opportunity to support the teaching staff in being able to meet the needs, the developmental needs of young children with disabilities in community-based settings. So we want to make sure that we're going to engage collaboratively with related services providers, as I mentioned before. And the itinerant teacher is going to be in charge of completing progress reports, annual reports, and contributing to the IEP in general, but really sort of working very, very closely in a consultation and coaching model. And I know I keep saying those words again and again, and partially that's because if you are anything like me as an early childhood special educator, which despite the fact that I haven't taught little kids in many, many years, I still very much think of myself as an early childhood special educator. I was trained in direct instruction, right? Well, that's not what you do when you're an itinerant. If you want itinerant to be successful, the research tells us very clearly we need to do a much more of a consultation coaching model, because it's the classroom teachers who are there every day, day in and day out, that need the supports to be able to implement and support the development of those IEP or IFSP goals. Heather? All right. So what does that mean? You're like, wow, Kate, you really blew through that. You had 15 minutes. Take your time. I know. I took a little Sudafed. I've got a little bit of a postnasal drip. Got some coffee going in me. I'm feeling good. So what does that mean for the state of South Carolina? Well, oh, thank you, Kerri. When Heather and I were talking many years ago, we had noticed regularly that least restrictive environment issues were coming up again and again, district after district. Not just in South Carolina, but nationally, this was an issue. So in collaboration with SCIC and Skippy, I'm not going to say anything about them. I'm going to let Kerri and other folks speak on those two things, those two organizations, and let those folks shine and do their work. They've been working for a long time to promote inclusion in early childhood sectors, right? We all know those folks. And then, so they've been working hard for inclusion, doing their thing. Then we look at the South Carolina Needs Assessment, and what happens? We notice that we need to extend and expand programs that serve young children with disabilities in community-based settings. Okay, so we know what the research is saying. More itinerant, least restrictive is an issue. Okay, what are we going to do about this? I give you the See It Academy. So over the last year or so, I've developed the Special Education Itinerant Teacher Academy. This is in collaboration with the State Department of Education Part B 619 coordinator and the Skippy project personnel. So thank you all for all of your support as we were getting this up off the ground. And the University of South Carolina, go Gamecocks. And we have, it says here we will develop, but we already did it. We developed and implemented a cluster of, we describe them as courses, but the truth is they are intensive workshops. So we have 3 workshops. And I think, Heather, am I correct? Those are described in more detail in the next slide. Is that correct? Beautiful. Oh, there we go. So I'll talk a little bit about that. So we developed these 3 workshops. They are fully online. And you might say, why online? Well, COVID. But the truth is, we wanted to make sure that these workshops for school districts were going to be as inclusive as possible. And that means access. And if everything was housed here at the university, we wouldn't be able to have the wonderful partners that we did in our very first cohort. So big shout out to these school districts who were part of our first cohort last year. We had beautiful Beaufort. Oh, I was so close. I'm sorry. I'm not a native South Carolinian. My apologies. Spart 1, Spart 5, Georgetown 50, and Greenwood 50 and Georgetown. So fabulous 5 school districts, excellent participation. We had anywhere between 2 and 7 participants from each school district, including 1 administrator. Most of those were the special education director or a early childhood administrator, as well as anywhere between 1 and 6 other team members. And so that team often consisted of the early childhood special educator, maybe the behavior specialist, school psychologist, SLPs, anyone who might be a part of the assessment or evaluation team for a district. So we met with the districts. They came on board. They were troopers. This was a 12-week workshop series. We met once a week virtually, as well as online content that they had access to. So the very first workshop focused on the instruction of inclusive settings. I was actually looking for my book, but I don't see it right now. Well, that's okay. It's the Building Blocks book for those of you that are familiar with that content. I absolutely love that. Really great evidence-based practice. There we go. Kerri knows. Absolutely love that book. And I think perfectly fits into the itinerant model of instruction. How do you excuse me? How do you support young children with IEPs or IFSP goals in an inclusive setting? The building blocks. So the first one was around instructional design. The second one was supporting that social emotional learning. And how could we not really consider that? What we were able to provide was an opportunity for every single member had access to all of the Pyramid E-module learning modules, the online modules through the pyramid model, as well as the trauma-informed and culturally responsive instruction. So really, really loved those. Great opportunities. So they had instruction, supporting social emotional learning, because we want to make sure we have those foundational skills and how do you support that. And then the third one, I think many of the participants would have said that this was maybe the most critical, which was collaborating with community members. Because we don't work in isolation. As Kerri said, there's a wheel, right? We're a circle of support. So we really need to think about ways in which we can support everyone. And so that means if you're a district and you have an itinerant services, great. But if you have poor relationships with your community partners and the childcare providers in your community, then you're not going to be able to get a whole lot done in itinerant services. So a big part of that was about forming relationships and getting that started. I'm going to give a specific example. Spartanburg 5 has done a really, really lovely job. They have a well-established itinerant service. I'm providing itinerant services for a long time, well over 10 years. And I think the thing that they've done really well in the last year that they are focusing heavily on is building and establishing long-term positive relationships with community partners. They had a welcome lunch where they got some folks together from the community to talk about next steps and ways to support the classroom teachers, particularly in programs that they serve many of their or provide a lot of their itinerant services. And I just love this idea of really being able to reach out, build those relationships, and get to know your community partners so that you can provide the kind of support that they would really need. All right, I'm just looking at my slides real quick. I think I've covered all of that. Weekly virtual sessions, at least one school admin. So again, sort of the overview of this was we're recruiting our first cohort last year. They finished July 31st was their last one. We went through May, June, and July, 3 months. We met once per week virtually. And yeah, we had a really, really wonderful job. Our second cohort begins May 22nd. We're going to start recruitment in March for that. So if you know a school district that might be interested, we are looking for more school districts. We have 3 to 5 that are already interested. We'd love to have up to 6 to 7 participate in the fall and the spring. So please let me know, send Heather or I an email, and we'd love to get you connected and get you registered so we can include that. And if you're a community partner, we would love to hear from you and ways that we can support you in itinerant services. Are there things that we could be doing to better serve and support you as you provide educational services for young children with disabilities? I'm going to wrap it up. I think that's it. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you again for your time. I really appreciate that.
Hi, guys. That brings us to our stopping place for part 1. And we hope that you will all click on the link to join us for part 2, so you can hear about some of the other initiatives that are going on and participate with us in a little bit of a little bit of a question and answer. Did we have any questions up to this point? I don't. Kerri or Samantha, were there any that we should try to address before we take our break?
No, no questions.
Okay, wonderful. And Kerri, Ken and Geyser had been putting some links in the chat for you guys that you can grab for you to do a little bit of research, a little bit more reading on our programs. We look forward to seeing you guys all in part 2. All right, enjoy your break, and we'll be back. There's a different link for part 2, so make sure you go to the part 2 link. Is that correct, Samantha? Yeah.
I think
Yep, that's right. We'll see y'all in part 2.